Ever since the beginning, I've had a love-hate relationship with Hu Tao. She's a favorite for a lot of people, and in a lot of ways I do see the appeal, but her personality never quite clicked with me, and when trying her out I initially had serious concerns about her playstyle. The gods of gacha have a dark sense of humor, so of course she was one of the first 5 stars that I ever got, and my first DPS to boot. I'd like to say she won me over, but it's complicated, and not necessarily for the reasons you might think. My journey with Hu Tao actually began before I'd ever seen her in-game. I started in version 2.1, and the first 5-star I really tried to get was Kokomi. I went to Hard Pity and sadly lost my 50-50. I had been pretty vocal that out of the standard 5 stars at the time, while the one I really wanted was Jean, I would have been happy with any of the others except for Gigi. And don't get me wrong there, while I'm aware of the memes, I wasn't bothered by her reputation. The reason I disliked her was actually some aspect of her voiceover. Something about it was really grating to my ears. I had recently made the trek to Liyue for the first time and met Gigi there, and while the voice actor objectively did a good job, I hated every moment of it. So yes, of course, my first 5-star was Gigi. After I eventually recovered from the disappointment, I felt like I had no choice but to at least give her a chance. I was free to play at the time and expected to have to make the most of what I was given. Over time, I got past my issues with the voiceover and really warmed up to her as a character. Her story is quite touching and sad, and the little details of her life really made me feel protective of her. In-game, she's a fantastic healer and carried me through much of the early and mid-game content. So what does all this have to do with Hu Tao? If you know their backstory, you'll probably see where this is heading. Gigi received her vision when she got caught in the crossfire during an Adeptal war. She died, but since the Adepti felt bad about her death, they resurrected her as a zombie by each giving her a portion of their power. The power was too much, so Gigi went berserk and had to be sealed up in amber. A few hundred years later, some people discovered her resting place and intended to take her back to the Wangchen funeral parlor for burial, and during transportation, Gigi woke up and fled. After all this, Gigi has a strong fear of death and an even stronger will to live. Meanwhile, as the director of the funeral parlor, Hu Tao sees death as a natural part of life and has a strong dislike for people who try to avoid it. She made it her personal mission to grant Gigi eternal peace by forcibly burying her. She would repeatedly prepare burial ceremonies, then kidnap Gigi with the intention of cremating her, to the point where poor terrified Gigi, who struggles to remember even her best friends if they're away from her for a couple of days, was so traumatized that she's now forever looking for places to hide in case Hu Tao comes around. Now, if we look at Hu Tao's perspective on this whole story, she does eventually come to accept that Gigi does not want to be buried and should be treated as an exception. However, I find it hard to get past that initial insistence, especially since she still jokes about it. It reminds me far too strongly of people who decide they know what's best for someone else, refuse to listen to that person's actual wishes on the matter, and do everything they can to take away their agency. Some people find it pretty easy to separate the character story from the gameplay, but for me personally, it's something which does strongly influence whether or not I enjoy playing as a character. When Hu Tao's banner rolled around, I kinda wanted to skip it because of all of this, but had a big problem. Thoma was on it. I absolutely loved him as a character, so I was desperate to at least have him on my account. And he just would not come home. Fortunately, I had saved up a lot of primo gems up to that point due to skipping Child, but it took a lot of wishes to get him, by which time I had myself a C1 Hu Tao. At this point, I really hoped that something similar to my experience with Gigi would happen, that I would get comfortable playing her, get past the parts of her character which made my hackles rise, and enjoy having one of the most powerful DPS characters in the game. Sadly, it didn't work out like that at first. To understand what the issue was, let's take a quick look at Hu Tao's playstyle. She's a pyro main DPS with a quirky kit which can take a bit of getting used to. When you use her skill, it drains her own HP, then infuses her spear with pyro for some extremely strong attacks which work brilliantly in vaporize and melt teams. A key aspect to her kit is that when her HP is below 50%, she gets a significant damage boost, so people tend to build her with a lot of HP and run around with it in the red as much as possible. Her burst is also incredibly powerful. It's a single damage instant nuke which can do huge amounts of damage in a small AoE, as well as recover some of her lost HP. Her strongest attacks are her charge attacks, so generally her ideal playstyle is to use her skill and then use animation cancelling to get as many charge attacks in as possible. Her C1 helps with this a ton because it prevents her charge attacks from consuming stamina, and I already had this constellation. Her playstyle actually caused me two major problems, one of which was eventually solved, but the other remains a small issue to this day. The first problem came when trying to build her and set up a team which would work for her. I just did not have anything which worked for her. I didn't really have good weapons for her for a long time and struggled to put together a build which felt satisfactory. As a free-to-play player still fairly early on into the game, I lacked spears for a long time and there weren't any useful event spears available. This is actually a common point of contention for a lot of people. Which is more valuable, getting Hu Tao's first constellation or getting the Staff of Thoma? She does have several other viable weapons, so in large part it would depend on what each account has available, and in my experience the real deciding factor will actually be the artifacts you happen to have. She generally needs either an EM or HP Sands, a Pyro Damage Goblet, and a Crit Circlet, and she benefits from quite a mix of stats. Her damage scales with her HP, EM, attack, crit rate, and crit damage all at the same time. Her preferred artifact set is 4-piece Crimson Witch, though 4-piece Shimenawa and 4-piece Gilded are pretty comparable, and she's perfectly fine with any combination of various 2-piece sets. While building her took a long while, the bigger problem for me at first was that I had no good team members for her. Hu Tao's best supports are characters like Xingqiu and Yelan, who can both apply Hydro off-field for her to vaporize. Yelan didn't exist back when I first got her, and I did not have Xingqiu. It wasn't until several months later that I would get my first Water Boy, and until then I had to rely entirely on Barbara for Hydro application. I also only had Thoma as a shielder, and as someone used to running around being constantly kept at maximum health by my Gigi, I felt very uncomfortable with Hu Tao's health bar looking so low. This is definitely a perception problem. Since she starts off with such high HP, even when she's at half HP, she often has more health left than many DPS characters do at max HP. But that knowledge did not help me feel more comfortable at the time. All in all, my Hu Tao had a fairly awkward build, and her teams were pretty painful. This all resulted in her remaining bench for a long time, but I always had her in the back of my mind as someone I felt I really should get comfortable with, and I did keep working on her build. She didn't really come into her own until an entire year later when Layla was released. By this time, I had a build for Hu Tao, which I was much happier with. I gave her HP, Pyro Damage, Crit Damage artifacts with 2-piece Crimson Witch and 2-piece Wanderers sets, plus the Deathmatch Spear, which all gave her a very strong HP stat, lots of Pyro Damage bonus, very good 70 to 200 crit stats, and a solid baseline of EM to boost reactions. Her ER is only at 120%, but I find this is more than enough for her in most rotations. I do have a Staff of Thoma now, but still hadn't had any luck in getting the right balance of stats for my artifacts to make her build work with her signature spear instead of the Deathmatch. I might however see about potentially replacing the Deathmatch with the new BP spear, Ballad of the Fjords, with that juicy EM bonus. I had also managed to get my hands on both Xingqiu and Yelan, but despite that, still never really found a team which made her playstyle work for me. She's often paired with Zhongli, but I've never found their combination to be all that satisfying to play. However, a little while after pulling Layla, I decided to once again try a new Hu Tao team and finally found one which felt fantastic. In this team, Layla provides an incredibly strong shield, which is boosted by Xingqiu's pseudo shield to provide extremely robust protection. Xingqiu provides enough healing to keep everyone alive if they take damage, but doesn't interfere too much with Hu Tao's preferred low HP gameplay. Both Yelan and Xingqiu apply a ton of Hydro and provide some good damage from off-field, while Hu Tao takes center stage and vaporizes to her heart's content for some awesome damage. With Layla providing some off-field cryo as well, you even get the occasional freeze and melt reactions. The Hydro Resonance means extra HP for all party members, which boosts Yelan and Hu Tao's damage while strengthening Layla's shield and improving Xingqiu's heals. This is by no means the only viable team for Hu Tao, and there will probably be others with higher damage potential, but for me, this is the perfect team that finally made her feel fun to play. But earlier I mentioned two problems and said that one of them was still somewhat unsolved. Now that I have a good build for her and a team I like, what's stopping me from enjoying her playstyle? Unfortunately, it's a problem caused by my preference for playing with a controller. I'm a console player at heart, and even when playing games on PC, I feel infinitely more comfortable using a controller, and struggle with keyboard and mouse controls in most genres. The vast majority of the time, this is not an issue in Genshin because I'm able to mitigate any disadvantages by working around them. For example, the rotation speed of Nahida's skill is painfully slow on controller, so I just stay conscious of enemy placement and dash to line them up before casting her skill to minimize the rotation time. For Hu Tao, however, the problem is harder to solve. In an ideal world, you'd cancel her charge attack animation as soon as you hit the opponent. This saves time, prevents her from zooming around the battle and messing up your positioning, and lets her achieve much greater damage as a result. This is comparatively easy when using a mouse and a keyboard, but is surprisingly finicky on a controller. This makes her playstyle feel more chaotic and less controlled than it would otherwise be, and is a bit frustrating experience when you're used to characters who have much smoother playstyles. For now, I mostly bring out Hu Tao either in the overworld to provide some variety, or for the rare occasions in the Abyss when I need Pyro and my Yoimiya team isn't working for me and Xiangling is busy. So, if you're considering pulling for her, what should you keep in mind? Hu Tao absolutely deserves her reputation as one of the most powerful characters in the game. Her gameplay has its quirks, which can be a little uncomfortable at first, but for the most part they're not difficult to get past once you give her a chance. If you do want to make most of her damage, be sure to do her trial a bunch of times before you make your decision, and note how you feel about her flying about in case you struggle or decide against cancelling her animations. Aside from that, she's pretty flexible and has a lot of strong teams which you can build around her as long as you have the right characters to support her, and is always a worthwhile option to have. In general, she shines in teams built for vaporize and melt reactions. She's quite selfish with her field time, so her ideal teammates are those who provide hydro or cryo while off-field. Yelan and Xingqiu are amazing with her. Rosario is another common partner for her, but there are others, such as support Ganyu or Kaya, who would do great. If you don't have her C1, then using charged attacks can cause you to run out of stamina and leave you vulnerable and unable to dodge, in which case a shield is a must. With a C1 it's less essential, but certainly makes things comfier. Layla is my personal favorite because her shield is strong, has 100% uptime and is quick to cast, but Zhongli and Diona are also popular. If you don't go the double Hydro route, which you don't necessarily have to if you use either Yelan or C6 Xingqiu, then having an Anemo Swirler and a VV Shredder in the team is also a great idea. Hu Tao has proven to be one of the most powerful characters in Genshin and is absolutely worth trying out. Any issues with her playstyle are rarely deal breakers once you've used her for a bit, and against the right content she just annihilates the enemies. I'll likely never have a soft spot for her in the same way I do for many characters, but despite that I still enjoy using her, and I'm glad to have her as an option. If you're on the fence, take the time to do the trial, she might surprise you. Until next time!